Hello and welcome everyone to Co-Creation Containers and to day 2 of the Ars Electronica Festival. I am very excited to be welcoming you all to today's talk. We are going to be situating ourselves in this moment of climate crisis, international pandemic, political polarization, and discussing the challenges that we find ourselves facing with regards to place, mobility, infrastructure as cultural producers. As many of you have read, I think in the event description, we're going to be tackling questions such as how we create together when borders are closed, and when they do open, how we can justify transoceanic flights and the ways that they further destabilize the climate. Without these connections across distance and difference, without being embodied in each other's presence, we're also curious about how we are going to feel together. How can we build community by constructing digital infrastructure that would support this kind of co-creation, networks, video conferencing, online collaboration. And with these spaces built, who will we invite to come together and how will they relate to each other? So to tackle these questions, to get into the mix together, we are forming this part panel, part roundtable conversation. The intention today, shared by those of us who are going to be speaking, really is that of a roundtable. So, we're imagining you all with us in a space, in a room, a virtual space together, where we can relate to each other and interact. In order to do that, we will take full advantage of the tools we have at our disposal. So we're gathering here on Swapcard. You have a live discussion link in the lower right-hand part of your screen where you can live chat to each other and to us during the event. There's also a tab there for questions. So we'd encourage you to jot down your questions for us at any point during the talk, and then we'll come back to them during the Q&A at the end. All right, so to start off, we'll do a little round of introductions. My name is Shamsher Verk. I'm the executive director of 01. We are a nonprofit based in San Francisco, California, in the United States. And we work to leverage art, technology, and science for social change. We do that work across 3 program areas, one in international exchange, another in arts education, and a third in public art. Pleasure to be here with you all. I'll pass the mic to Julie Phelps.
Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Hi, I'm Julie Phelps. I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of Counterpulse. Counterpulse is a 30-year organization that owns and operates an interdisciplinary art space in downtown San Francisco. We have a series of programs ranging from residencies to presentations to commissions to public engagement and free workshops. We have been rolling through the pandemic, iterating ourselves out of our own walls into the streets, into the parks, and into online platforms, which I'll tell you a little bit more later on in the chat. I'm just so pleased to be here with Shamsher and Ellen. Over to you, Ellen.
Hi, I'm Ellen Perlman. I'm a co-director of ThoughtWorks Arts along with Andy McWilliams. Our primary focus is on offering in-depth artist residencies to tackle issues of newly emerging technologies and social change. We also run very intensive collab creations called Artihack, and until the pandemic, although it's continuing virtually, we ran Hardware Hack, part of the Volumetric Society, which reached out for community engagement and offered local New Yorkers access to high-cost tools like Oculus Rifts or brain-computer interfaces that they could not access financially themselves, as well as gave them dinner, although this is suspended until the pandemic is suspended. Thank you.
So we'll turn to you, Ellen, first for a brief presentation, and for all of you watching, we'll then follow with a presentation by myself and then Julie before we dive into a more interactive portion of the day and talk amongst ourselves.
Yeah, I just want to say, I'm going to show you a video of a project we did last summer, in which we had about 2 months notice to go from live to on live interactivity. So we built a system from scratch in 2 months, and I'm going to now share my screen and I'm going to show you what we did, and it will speak for itself. Just let me make sure that the sound is yes, the sound's good. Okay, this is a short video. In these dance-demic performances, dancers wear embodied sensor devices on their bodies, live broadcasting their heart rate, blood oxygen, muscle contractions, humidity, and other biometrics. The first performance by Razvan Stoya draws on language to describe the perceptual experience of otherness. The next presentation, performed by Hussein Simcoe, examines an individual's journey of finding mental strength and resilience in the face of adversity and chaos. The biometrics from the dancer appeared in 2 ways. In the first video, you could actually see them dancing, and you could see their biometrics in the corner. And the video and audio in both were being manipulated by teams lifetime that ranged from San Francisco to Toronto, Canada, to New York, to London, to Estonia, and Kiev, Ukraine, and India. And the entire performance was broadcast on an artist-owned network in Estonia lifetime. In the second video, the colors, which you might have noticed around the dancer, sometimes they were streams of tan and brown, sometimes they became red and blue. Those were his blood oxygen readings, which was strapped to his forehead lifetime. So we set up a studio where the dancers were alone in the studio because of COVID, which was very strong at that time. All the dancers had to do was push the on button with the camera and perform, and we handled everything else remotely. No one was present except the dancer. All sound was generated lifetime by the remote teams, and all visuals were generated lifetime by the remote teams. The other thing the dancers did have to do is they had to strap on the sensors onto their body And that was the other thing. So in other words, we refined it down to strap-on sensor, make sure it's fully charged, hit on button on camera, and that was it. Dancers didn't have to do anything else. So in terms of a remote presentation and a live presentation, we were able to work with liveness while creating environments with participants from literally all around the world lifetime as the performers performed. So in terms of all the questions we're going to be asking, the issue of virtuality and liveness is a very important question that moving forward in the pandemic and post-pandemic, we're all going to have to tackle. And this was our 2-month fast solution. I'll also add that the streaming network in Estonia and the biometric indicators, we were lucky enough pre-production to have those individuals work and customize both platforms for our needs. So we were able to tweak everything to our specific situation. And actually that customization is something moving forward that artists, performers, and communities of practice will have to negotiate. So I think, am I at time? Or, yeah, okay, thank you. And I look forward to discussing more with all of you.
Thanks, Ellen. All right, my turn to do a little show and tell. I want to apologize too for some construction noise in the background. We are having an ice cream shop installed below our office. So you may be hearing some hammering and screwdrivers and such, but I'll do my best to speak up. All right, so what I would love to share with you all is a little video mini documentary from one of the exchanges that we ran last year. This was an international exchange between the United States and Brazil, funded by the US State Department. We worked with US embassies, or I should say the diplomatic site in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, and placed an American artist by the name of Santiago X, who is based in Chicago, or on the traditional unceded homelands of the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. Santiago X is an indigenous futurist who brought to our exchange a very unique perspective as someone drawing on heritage from the Pacific Islands and from North America through indigenous lineage, and connecting to the communities in Brazil where he was visiting, who have really had some very intense encounters with the landscape and with extractive industry and mining and such. So this is one of a series of 6 exchanges that we ran last year. We had to pivot them all to virtual exchange. They're normally in-person exchanges. And this one, I think, gives you a sense of what happens in both of those scenarios, because the exchange was actually started at the beginning of March, and then mid-exchange, we had to extract Santiago X, evacuate the artist essentially during the pandemic before borders closed, and then continue the exchange virtually. So I will share my screen and show you what that looked like.
JACA Center for Art and Technology and the U.S. Embassy Office in Belo Horizonte are proud to present the American Arts Incubator.
Vai ser projeto de mentoria que vai trabalhar com artes, tecnologia, e a gente adicionou pedacinho de empreendedorismo. Então, eu acho que vai ser mês aí de muito aprendizado, semana de muita coisa interessante.
In Brazil, we'll be addressing the social challenge of economic inequity through a workshop series entitled Augmented Earth, Embedded Futures by artist Santiago X.
Sent from the United States to Brazil, the key word is exchange, and I'm learning by being here and through the relationships that I've created being here. It's inspiring the way the participants are thinking, their skill sets, their visions, and also their personal stories the more I get to learn each participant. The first 2 days of workshops were introducing ourselves to the complexities of making art in a contemporary world. People brought in pretty everyday, mundane objects, but their stories about those objects and surrounding those objects made it 10 times more sacred. That augmentation is something that I want the participants to take with them going forward. It's our experience and our lived experience that make objects into art, and transform that. And the reciprocity of that object becoming art and that art influencing others is what it's all about. We're in a heightened state right now of urgency and desperation, and with the coronavirus taking over our nations and the globe, this transition from workshop weekend 1 to experiencing the physical space and how to morph that into a digital world. The next step of the workshops is to go virtual, and I think there's a lot of strength in that and a lot of power in understanding how we can communicate in a technological world our ideas.
So they were given these tech kits by motorcycle with 3D scanners, 360 video cameras, and each of them was given the task to use these tools and to augment their virtual worlds with reality.
Cada vez mais nós estamos migrando para o mundo virtual. Esse confinamento é mais um exemplo de como é que está sendo traçado aí o nosso, entre aspas, destino.
O confinamento está sendo uma questão muito maluca, porque a gente recebeu os kits e dá vontade de ir na rua, dá vontade de sair filmando, tirando fotos, escaneando tudo. E aí a gente meio que tem que adaptar nossas ideias, e está sendo um desafio, assim, até para a gente poder tentar ver como é que a gente faz isso possível dentro das possibilidades que a gente tem.
Nem todo mundo tem acesso à internet. Eu mesmo tive dificuldade de comparecer a diversos encontros. Com o tempo a gente foi se ajustando e dando tudo certo.
No momento que a gente tá em isolamento, a gente fica meio perdido, assim. E isso deu um foco para produzir alguma coisa interessante, quem sabe plantar uma sementinha ali da reflexão nas pessoas.
How to create augmented reality portals where you hold up your smartphone and there's a gateway, and you can walk inside this gateway and experience this curated three-dimensional world that you created on your computer to tell your story, or a 360 video of a location. A lot of people don't get to access. Maybe the iron mines, outside of the city. You walk in the doorway, you're surrounded by that, and you walk back out and you're back where you are.
Our ability to transcend the adversity of the pandemic and our isolation, and the fact that we're here together, creating beautiful things together, shows our humanity, throughout all of this. It makes the digital world more physical, and this interfacial space that we're starting to create together, and these beautiful landscapes for thought, these portals, that hopefully when you come out the other end, we gain something, right? This entire experience has been a portal for me, and I hope it's been a portal for you.
When the quarantine, and this comes away, we come back together, we'll have an opportunity to really experience each other, and hopefully we learn something, from our separation.
Great. So honestly, the video really says it all. I'll be really brief because we can come into conversation together in a moment after Julie presents. But just to highlight a few things from the video that I think resonate with the work we're doing and speak to the topic of today's conversation. You heard from a few participants about this isolation that we've all experienced, of course, during the pandemic, but I think more generally in the contemporary world through capitalist isolation and overall being turned inwards rather than turned towards the community. So these exchange experiences, co-creation opportunities can give us direction when we're feeling lost, can bring people together and connect them across difference, and can really create a lasting bond that can span time and distance after the fact. I also really like this idea, two kind of concepts or rephrasings that Santiago X brought to the way he envisioned this exchange. One being that we can augment our virtual worlds with reality, sort of flipping the usual paradigm of augmenting reality with the virtual, and that we are creating an interfacial space through these kinds of interactions, like today, where we are talking heads on a screen. And that this is a kind of social space that we have the power to interrupt and construct in creative ways that might depart from what is being imposed by the platforms or interfaces that we're using. So, all right, I'll save the other thoughts that I have for the collective conversation after and pass things on to Julie.
Thank you so much, Shamshir and Ellen. Great to see those videos again, and I love the work that you're doing. I'm going to talk about a project that's a little bit different that Counterpulse was part of over the year of 2020-21. It's called Grand Reunion, and it was a project designed to research how dance and choreographic practices can be part of reducing harm in the world and creating more just futures for all. It was instigated in 2020, actually before the pandemic, but was precipitated by all of the things that have been brought into more relief during the pandemic: social isolation, climate crisis, political polarization. It was a collaboration between ArtStations Foundation in Poland and Movement Research in New York and Counterpulse in San Francisco, and designed to be a conference that we would host in Poland over 10 days to bring together practitioners in the dance field, as well as sort of likely and unlikely co-conspirators to create a kind of toolkit of somatics and improvisation. The practice is really strong in dance and choreographic practice that we feel like could be generalized and help other people cope, survive, and thrive in the conditions that we were all living under. When the pandemic hit, our conviction to do the project was renewed, and it felt even more important, though it was clear we couldn't gather together in person, and international travel was off the table in general. So we reshaped the project into a 10-month online platform that was a series of workshops, gatherings, meetings, as well as an online publication of articles and videos and podcasts and slow-mo disco sets for dancing at home. It's really a huge collection of different material generated by hundreds of different artists from all over the world. And you can check out the entire online publication and some recordings of some of the live meetings that we had on grandreunion.net. We'll drop that website into the chat bar as well. So I want to talk about one part of this project that became a major conceptual and theoretical kind of binding agent between the group. So it's the project statement. So typically in dance and maybe many different projects, a project statement is written and used for grant writing purposes and then outreach and then sort of shelved and archived along with everything else. But in this particular case, the project statement became almost a manifesto for the project. It was conceived of as like a homing beacon, a way to say what we were trying to do as a group and put it out into the world and see if we could attract people who had some of the same questions or wanted to have some of the same conversations, or ideally also be a provocation for people who don't share a mindset or a set of practices with the people who wrote the project statement, so we could have some conversations that would have texture and we could be changed by coming together and gathering. But also, as you'll all remember, the pandemic was, especially the early pandemic, things seemed to change almost every week. And so we began this process of rewriting and revising the project statement almost daily to kind of keep up with what seemed relevant and useful and provocative. And as that grew with the core group of people, we also got interested in moving more laterally and collectivizing and co-creating the project statement and recreating it. So we began a formal process of inviting a new person each month of the series to rewrite or re-choreograph or reform the project statement in some way. And it took many different shapes. Some people used language in a more traditional rewriting capacity. Other people used decoupage or collage or drawings. And it amassed into this palimpsest. Each iteration of the project statement referencing and drawing on its inspirations and what had come before, but then reshaping and reforming it anew to provide a next tier of questions or a deeper level of conversation. And you can check out the whole series that spanned the 10 months of the Grand Reunion project on the website, grandreunion.net. But I just wanted to share one iteration of that, the rewrite that happened with Hannah Ayas in December, here in a video that we can tee up here in a second, Shamsher, if you can help me.
What is it they are pushing? The change is not only to be expected, it is first of all to be made. A predetermined, planned, designed by him manner, declaration of ownership and the success of possession. Maybe it was the summer, maybe in the winter, maybe it was last year or the year before, it really doesn't matter. Attention and a large investment of energy. During what time? From September 2020, it really doesn't matter. Create time. They are so many. Or insight just because. Handle, meaning, and instrument. Senses which just sit there, proud and passionate about possessing disembodied times from geographies. Knowing fully well, it may not have climaxed perfectly with the clank. Falling and failing, frozenly impavid. In person remains the ultimate aim. The view from the window owns me. The time owns me. Togetherness for us now is a shared focus. Remain responsive within the shifting realities. Don't adapt or even respond. No need. Sense being with space. Just as much information missing as is present. We show up to be changed. Unhinging, navigate not knowing. It really doesn't matter how much. There is much that we do not know, and has always been, but clear, seen, heard. Leaves a trace of what came before, under which to be suspended. There could be a possibility for not having the capacity of defining what it is actually to be a human as a whole and concrete entity. So we begin again, as if it was shameful to be owned. In the face of a world pulling apart, we insist on being together, born just now, as if we were parts of something, a puzzle piece for the part-taking. Save the whales, never yet arriving, extend existing, fuller, less hysterical, less lost, and more found, We desire to meet all, buy something for immediate use. The center of the earth is directly beneath each of us. Tissue everywhere, basically. We have most things in common, so just fall. The only way out is through, and so I play. Would that make us losers? Isn't it naive to expect anything else?
So that's just one example of 10 different rewrites that happened. And it's a really engaging process if you're a language nerd or a dance nerd to go and check out each month in the series to see how the project statement took shape over the period of the project. The reason I bring up this palimpsest project rewriting statement is, related to the name of today's conversation, co-creation containers. The process was based on and also generated a lot of questions around community, building community in absentia, co-creation, collaboration. How can we add to the generative and collective ideas of our times? How do we unhinge from the tyranny of originality or innovation? How do we, have peace with know that we're all just part of a giant bricolage? And these feel like really, really relevant questions right now for me ongoing and just in the world at large and with creative cultural productions, particularly on the West Coast, where innovation and originality and, something being novel or new is really, really valued. So the latest form that the project statement actually took is actually a question abstract. So it generated more questions than answers to go through this process, and those were formed into something that I wrote at the end of the project in June. And I'd just like to read that as a sort of closing provocation for the conversation that we'll have as this group, and hopefully including questions from you all afterwards. So it reads this way. Question abstract. Can we write manifestos anymore? Can we be positional enough to say that we want to change? Is it possible to act collectively? Can we be supple enough to form a we? The superimposing of each other's ideas and infinite menageries of internet parcels forever downloadable? Can the splintered factions of attention and shredded geographies we're left with be stitched together to create a whole? If you know there's always more missing, always a shadow cast, can we ever be together? Can we exist and not exist at once? Can we have everything and nothing in common? Can we be just we and not be we? Are we consuming more than we can consider? Living more than we can remember? Is there anyone in this we with me? Are our mistakes now only that which we neglect to do? Are we inert? Is tension a static thing or a moving thing, or both? What's anchoring the center of our universe? What sets our rules of engagement? What meaning structures do we have to shelve our content? The future is a story we tell ourselves about our now. What are we building? So I hope that that question abstract can help inform the conversation that we'll have. And I look forward to talking together with you, Shamsher and Ellen.
Thanks so much, Julie. Wow, okay, so much to discuss, few minutes to discuss it all in, but I think we have enough time to dig into the juicy bits a little bit. To start us off, I want to kind of riff on some of these provocative questions you're bringing to the table, especially at the end of your presentation, Julie, around co-creation and collectivity, and really problematizing this act of co-creation as something that may or may not even be possible. I think, in the Brazil exchange that I was sharing, there's somewhat of an optimistic read of what's possible, people talking about the connection that they achieve through co-creation or a sense of direction. I'm curious to hear more about what kind of was produced through co-creation or the attempt at co-creation in the Grand Reunion project.
I think the simplest answer to that would be enduring personal relationships. That coming together and sharing practice and working collaboratively with people that maybe you'd never even met before. So, you know, the project statement rewrite was something that I was sort of overseeing, and I worked with people in Berlin and Turkey and Poland, people I'd never met before, to collaborate on writing and generating language. And um, there are interesting products that have come out of that. There's these poems and these videos, and in a way they're an artwork, especially when taken as a whole. But the real thing that was co-created was the personal relationships, and what those will yield over time is maybe the most interesting material.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's sort of a problem point for us too. I think that like the enduring relationships can be seeded during these like acts of cultural creation that we, you know, try to create as producers. And then what, you know, and then how does that get sustained for us? You know, we think about alumni engagement, or like how we can provide seed funds for ongoing collaboration when we work in a community. What do those ongoing touch points look like for you? And maybe also this is a good opportunity to pull Ellen into the discussion and talk about what Dance-ademic looks like after the performance moment has passed.
You know, the maybe it's the dance field, but I also think that there's a way it's just a human thing, is that we long to have those enduring relationships manifest in like in-person time with each other at some point, to sort of, it feels like they're a little unconsummated. And I've tried to really break down my expectation that of liveness and IRL and things needing to be time-based and place-based to be real or significant. And these past 2 years have been major for me. I wouldn't even take a single meeting on a Zoom call before this happened. Like I really had like almost a obsessive insistence on being together in person. I run a live arts venue. So, you know, that said, it still does feel like that's where the relationships want to go. Like there's a pull towards that, and there feels like it's just personal and a creature thing, like just a desire to be together, but also that there's a next chapter of the work that we can do together if we can have less mediation between our bodies and our practices, especially as dancers and choreographers, having our bodies be our primary artistic instrument. It was a real just technical challenge in some ways for us to collaborate virtually, you know, working with video, and even for some dancers working with language almost seemed like working with like a mediating technology. So, you know, getting to a place that feels more direct, like there's a more direct lifeline, while also continuing to just realize and need to accept that what we did over that 10-month series of working together online would actually not have been possible in in-person gatherings. The shape that it took, the way people could join from Australia and Brazil and, you know, Poland all at once would just, and on an ongoing basis, just cultivated something different than even 10 days in person would have. So I guess the jury's a little bit out on how it all continues to like grow from the roots that have been put down over this past period.
Yeah, and I want to take some points on what both Shamshar and Julie said, and I want to segue and then bring it back. As Julie said, she didn't want to take a call on Zoom before. In 2010, I was in Canada working with the Canadian Research Chair in Telematic Art. And I was creating over fiber optic research networks performances between Canada and Hong Kong with motion capture studios. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because the issues of virtuality have been in the wings for a long time. This was in 2010. And IPv6 is the fiber optic research networks that people like you and I do not have access to. And so these aspects didn't just get born with the pandemic, although most people weren't aware of it. So that's the first thing in response to Julie saying she didn't want to do that. The second thing is I saw two things in both of your presentations that I think are good to discuss. And one in Shamsher's presentation is the issue of access. That really struck me. Who has access and who does not? And that really was very clear in Brazil. And that is really meaning that those who have access moving forward are going to be in one whole class of people, and those who do not have access are going to be in another class. The second thing is in terms of what Julie spoke about, and my own experience is the issue of duration. And duration, I mean by consistency. And by consistency, I mean, you talked about, Julie, 10 months of interactions, whereas we're giving this presentation now for about an hour and a half, and then, it evaporates. So the two issues that I see arising from all of our interactions are, the first is access, which is not something we individually can solve. It's a global infrastructure problem. And as the climate emergency accelerates, will become more critical. And the other is living in virtuality, which is the drive toward virtuality, is going to be durational more and more as we are restricted from movement. So those are just two issues I wanted to discuss and bring up.
Riffing on this question of access, thank you for bringing that in, Ellen. I just want to share a little bit more sort of behind the scenes from several exchanges we had. I heard, that one participant in Brazil, who was one of several, I think, who had connectivity issues, and how that gets manifested inside of an exchange. So for those who, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Peru, we had 3 exchanges in South America last year. I know I'll center on those for a minute. There were several folks who had their only connection to the internet was through their mobile phone. And that, of course, had very limited bandwidth. And what it often meant is that they would have to remove themselves from the interfacial space. So they were not, they were not a face, they were not a body in the virtual space with us. They were a voice at best. And even then, a sort of intermittent voice that would become part of the activity and then leave. So thinking about consistency and duration, never mind ongoing connection after an exchange, just even during a virtual experience, what does it mean to have a fragmented virtual experience? Sorry for that siren.
Yeah, that's a fragmented virtual experience is going to be so critical. Right now, you can see fragmented virtual experiences happening with access to their mobile smartphones. And I can think of 2 countries offhand without naming names, where people's virtual interactions have just been completely shut down, I would say, in the past 2 months. And so that's going to get very interesting when you have what we refer to as the balkanization of access, much less who has access, as we dive deeper and deeper into virtuality. That's certainly one thing to think of. The other is, on the other hand, mobile phones, as they become faster with better chips and more streamlined with better connectivity, which is obviously happening, will provide more and more access to people as prices drop. And I just want to say, I saw that in Myanmar, because what I saw in Myanmar was the price of a phone go from 2,000 US dollars to, within 3 years, 3.5 years fall to about $1.50. And that, so Myanmar came online, they skipped the internet, and they just went from nothing back to mobile in about 3 years as the price came down and everything got smaller. So access is unfortunately or fortunately due to innovation, whether we like it or not, because innovation lowers prices and manufacturing, which gives more access. So it's a very tricky cycle. That's what I wanted to say about that.
Yeah. I mean, so many of us doing programming online have discovered really interesting intersections with access. You know, geographic access. Counterpulse does a lot of work with the queer community and finding that, you know, creating programming in San Francisco and being able to bring that online is bringing access to people not in urban centers all over the country who would otherwise not even be able to go to something that we take for granted, something as simple as just a drag show. People with different physical and mobility opportunities, being able to access content online where they may not be able to come to a venue, or and that's been a silver lining is an understatement. It's actually been an amplification of Counterpulse's core mission around providing access to the arts. And I think that the positive dimensions, at least in the communities that I run with, have been you know, touted a lot, but talking and looking internationally, which there's so many benefits to looking internationally in virtuality, allowing us to do that more frequently and with more consistency is a huge opportunity and also a responsibility to see, you know, other dimensions of access, the way content moving, decentering from place-based or geographic communities to online, and the detriments to access that may have for communities where you can't assume everyone has a laptop or a smartphone in the way you can in the Bay Area. And I'd be really, I mean, I've been learning along the way from 01 and the work that they're doing abroad, and being able to really try and grok that as a sort of change of an addition to that focus as well. I think that, you know, there's a, you know, right now a hyper focus on virtual platforms and creating access to that and creating content for that. And you know, Counterpulse still primarily deals in the body and in dance, and the research and innovation and creating access around live experiences is also ongoing. And it's to me, there's almost a question around access around just like volume, like the amount of content and the number of fronts I feel like I'm operating on at this point. It's untenable, you know, like I can't even access everything I have access to, you know? So that's, you know, first world problem, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it is almost like we have too much access, and there's a sort of deluge of platforms and technologies that are all being made available at the same time, and then we are still one body, one perceptual unit. There were some provocative terms used. I mean, I've heard you use in the past, Julie, and in, I think, the description of the Grand Reunion Project, of body as network or body as technology. I'm kind of curious what's coming out of discussions you've had around just what role the body plays in all of this, you know, in trying to make these, make a cohesive story out of our virtual connections, and then incorporate it into this thing that we live within.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, before moving so much content online and before the pandemic, I was asking these questions about this because, you know, there's been this boom in new media arts in the Bay Area, and I wanted to find a way to get interested in it, honestly, just like on a personal level. And I got really obsessed with this idea that the single most sophisticated piece of technology we have is still the body. And it's, you know, it's a sensor, it's a it's so many different things that we then recreate in technological form and then like strap onto the body or like put in front of the eyes, a lot of stuff in front of the eyeballs, visual culture. And so just it really came out of the desire to intersect disciplines to create more interesting, more incredible artwork. It was simple when I first got interested in it, and that bringing together new media artists who were working on the cutting edge of all of these technologies with really deeply rooted, sophisticated dance-based artists who are also working on the cutting edge of the technology of the body through somatics and improvisation and movement and choreography would be a really interesting mashup. So we launched a residency program actually with your help, Shamsher, called Combustible, that's now been running for about 5 years. That is just that. It's a residency designed to bring together dance and new media artists to create works for stage. And we have run one of those residencies that got very long and prolonged through the pandemic to create video installations and virtual events that involve dancers in interesting ways, using video and projection and kind of creating the ghost and trace of the body and video kind of style without having live performers. But it's been a really interesting journey. And I think that it's probably morphed a little away from my original interest of like body as a piece of technology to the practices of dance and the way dance is very sophisticated at making interdisciplinary art. Dance projects, stage-based projects have always been happening at the intersection of body and technology. I mean, when lights and electric lights were the cutting edge technology, one of the first places those were showing up was in theaters, right? So the black box is kind of the original virtual reality container, like a space where you can control all the like elements of perception, what's seen, what's not seen. So it's definitely grown out of this kind of original interest of body as technology to just stage work being a site of interdisciplinary creation and bringing in more artists into co-creation is just makes incredible art projects happen.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that, Julie, and it's also touching on some questions in the chat, because what I see you're talking about is what I call the exoskeleton and the intraskeleton. And what I mean by that is the intraskeleton is implantables. And implantables in terms of mediating technology are going to become, even though it's very hard to believe this now, much more commonplace, actually. And exoskeletons are augmenting our sensual reality with devices such as in VR, AR, eyes, just as you said. But there's many devices that work with muscle and movement and skeleton and bone. All of these, bone conductivity, are being used in certain types of practices. So there is a movement in augmenting in both the interior and shrinking, interior and augmenting in terms of exoskeletons, the entire human cognitive being, which also is happening accelerated by the use of machine learning, which is also being part of that, and robotics. That's all coming into the exo-interior dialogue as the pandemic is happening and as we are more in lockdown. All of these and the climate emergency are creating themselves in relationship to each other. They're not alone. They're not happening in one location or another. They're occurring concurrently. So that's what I wanted to add.
I love that landscape, like technological landscape that you're painting, Ellen, in response to, I think that Danielle Siembera's question in the chat around, which I think is actually quite nice and provocative in response to what we're talking about. Danielle says, if given the choice I would meet someone in person over Zoom any day, but what if we started to dance and meet at the same time, even if that's virtual? We could use haptic technology adapted to dancers to provide meeting feedback through movement that you can't through Zoom. And that has me thinking about also the ways in which we embody during a virtual experience. So like, I know Julie in the Grand Reunion project, and clearly in the Dance-demic project, there's movement, there's a very immersive somatic experience happening for those who are participating, and that can be a way to come into our bodies, come into the present, and to kind of remember the experience too in a different way than if we were to just sort of stay flatly with the screen and the image. So I don't know if either one of you want to riff more on that, the kind of somatic experience of virtual connection.
Julie, why don't you go for that first, and then I'll come in on it, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something just really simple about it. You know, the body is an incredibly important part of our overall experience and well-being. And I joke that I've taken on the lifestyle of a computer engineer with still my nonprofit salary. You know, it used to be that I would meet in person, and even just the simple interstitial moments of walking to and from a meeting or going to get a coffee brought the body in, right? A moment to reset, and these things that used to be an invisible part of how we would mark, you know, this energetic space and then moving into this energetic space. And now we can literally jump, you know, and that body just stays in the chair, and I think we feel it. You know, I don't think it's really probably a very contested fact that that's challenging and hard and like brings on suffering on the physical level. But, you know, also like, you know, looking at octopus or something, the nervous system and the intelligence of the human being is a decentralized system. It's not just about cognition or thought or language. That, you know, science has even shown that with retrograde amnesia, like you forget facts or recalling certain types of information, but procedural stuff is actually remembered by your body. So you can forget the name of your wife, but you can just, if you sit a person down in a car, they'll just start it and drive and use their blinker, you know? And so we know that the wholeness of the human form and the human capability and the human intelligence is a complete system. And there's really just no reason not to incorporate that if you want to be creative, if you want to be well, if you want to have deep connections with yourself and with others. So I totally agree we should be dancing while we meet. And, you know, it's probably something I should have brought into today's panel, just something as simple as, you know, just like closing your eyes and undulating your spine, or just like, and then you can make tableau and like engage the visual culture, the interfacial, like you said, the term coming up in the Brazil video, in ways that, you know, add something. So I think a stretch break, all that, like it's these simple things. Sometimes it's always the simple things that make the biggest difference.
Yeah, and you know, I've been watching very deeply the emergence of alternate technologies, and you know, Facebook launched or is launching what they call the metaverse, and the point of the metaverse, besides Facebook controlling it, is Facebook creating a meeting system which will be in VR, which they will own, and that will take away Zoom or AR and many other things, because then it will become sort of a 3D situation. That is furthering disembodied practices, and also from what I've been able to glean about Facebook Building 8, which is where they have their secret sauce investigations, is they are very involved in the breakdown of different modalities into containers that then they can integrate. What I mean by that is your cognition, your eyes, your ears, your smell, your body movements, everything is going to be quantifiable for in their way they would like to see. And in terms of quantifiable, it can be manipulated and monitored. So the senses of the human animal are going to become, as they are now, but on a very low level, attention for some meaning. Attention is something that we don't have enough of. And our attention, right? We're always distracted. That is mediated and that is intentional. For example, something like that. So as you're talking about interacting with the body, what will happen in the next 5 to 8 years is systems will show up that will incorporate those body interactions into the systems, which they did since the days of the Kinect. But this will be on a very different level because 5G phones and 6G phones will be able to handle it, which we don't have in everyday life yet, but we will. So that's what I'm saying, not countering what you're saying, but suggesting as a way that things are going. And that's going to be something we're all going to have to look at in terms of co-creation and the ownership of co-creation and climate emergency, which is, I feel, is COVID's a dress rehearsal for. And I feel that very strongly.
An ominous dress rehearsal. Okay, so as we're starting to approach the end of our time, I want to sort of put two things out there. One, of course, that we are still welcoming questions. If anyone else would like to drop a question into the chat or the question feed on the live discussion and swap card, you're more than welcome. I have maybe one more question for us as a group. And then maybe we can end the talk with a few links from each of us about how you can follow our organizations and a brief somatic experience. So the question I really had is actually more practical. And we've been talking kind of in very abstract terms about what all of this means to our work and the way it's sort of taking shape in the world today. But I'm actually really curious to hear technically, or in terms of the minutia of the logistics of it all, how people did connect during Danceademic. Like how did the artists actually speak to each other during the performance, before the performance, after the performance? How did the audience interact with those artists? And likewise, Julie, with your work, like this ongoing 11-month collaboration, what did those meetings look like? Or, just to give folks a little bit more of a kind of maybe how-to or logistical ideas for how they might shape their own co-creation experiences.
Okay, well, I'll jump in because the thing we didn't show you in the videos was just like Zoom, everyone could see each other, the audience, and the audience could make comments, just like is common in many things. And what we were working on, but technically we did not have enough time to implement, was a generic emotion facial recognition system of the audience. So the dancers could actually see live time, the audience is happy for the most part, the audience is not happy. Technically, it can be done. We did not have the time to do it. So all the audience interaction from the videos I showed you was cut out. And in terms of the dancers, there was one studio. One dancer came in, danced. The other dancer came in and danced. And there was a quick sanitary wipe down of things. And the studio had different exits and entrances. So the dancers knew each other, but during the performance, they just entered in, entered, sanitize, perform, exit, enter, sanitize, perform, exit. So, because COVID was so difficult at that point, that's all they could do. But the audience did interact, the audience lifetime. Everyone could see them and hear and watch their comments. So that's all I wanted to say. And facial recognition and emotional recognition, not facial recognition, emotional recognition of audience in a generic way, anonymized, is coming to a theater near you soon.
Yeah, I'll keep my the tactical part pretty simple. Actually, we really used Zoom heavily to interact for our meetings and workshops and anything we were doing like in real time with each other. And but really tried to, these were some of the earliest Zoom meetings I was personally having, and for many of us, the like earliest like really big group meetings we were having. So we used those meetings also to kind of experiment with the platform and the medium of Zoom, like, you know, discovering what happens if, you know, you bring your lights in front and you create tableaus, and how to create group environments that are less framed and facial, and and bring the body in. So allowing each other to see our bodies on Zoom, like standing up or moving away from the desk, and really, really simple like experiments with the kind of like box of Zoom. And then there were small like hybridities that came in as things got safer, like people in different locations deciding to meet together, calling in together, creating content together, and, you know, video and things like that that they would then share back into the group. And lots of email threads. But you know, we weren't with Dance-A-Demic, for example, like the mechanization and the experimentation with technology was part of the content. With Grand Reunion, they were really just tools, you know, and we were just trying to use the tool that was actually the most simple to use, not major. We did work with a VR artist who created one of the monthly publications. I believe it's the June as well as the September publication did have a virtual landscape that was created. So you could experience it just sort of like with a legend and click-throughs on a website, or you could enter a virtual world where different content was housed in different virtual structures that you could enter for those who had the interest and also the technology on their side to enter spaces like that. So, you know, it was more experimental, but meant to be kept simple and just human based.
Great, thanks. To respond to my own question, I'll share a couple of tools that we also used in exchange when we needed to pivot quickly to virtual. We found several. I mean, Zoom was clearly like the meeting platform that most people turned to, and we also leaned hard into it. We often complemented it with other messaging platforms, and also online collaboration platforms like Miro or Mural, which allow for sort of a more visual collaborative space. And then into virtual realms and virtual galleries, we also did quite a bit of work, including that with the Brazil Exchange, in Mozilla Hubs, and creating virtual spaces within Mozilla Hubs where people could, you know, through WebVR access projects in 3 dimensions, as well as several other like online galleries. I mean, there are innumerable tools that are being built right now, but I think there's maybe the interesting thought to leave this on is that us as cultural producers are, you know, still continuing to wrangle, you know, do the fundraising, wrangle the logistics, and put on these events. But our work is also becoming more about creating these platforms or creating these presentation spaces, which is different, of course, than what we were doing before in our black box or in our public space, or whatever it is that we would have been producing, wherever it was that we were producing cultural events. Great, well, we're just about 4 minutes from the end here. Maybe this is the time we'll start dropping in some links on swap cards so that you all can follow our respective organizations and the projects we've been discussing. And also, if Julie would be willing, maybe we could do a brief somatic experience together, just to shake it up a little bit before folks transition onto their next Ars Electronica event or whatever else lays ahead.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'll bring in the olfactory. I think that's always interesting to do on online platforms because it's really something that's still very unique to the body-based experience. So if you just want to close your eyes, start by closing your eyes. Just breathe. If you're sitting or standing, You can also make that more of an active thing that you're doing than something that maybe you aren't noticing. So pressing your feet into the ground, rooting them down, feeling the stabilizing force that they provide for you when they're really planted. Sit bones, find where they're touching the chair if you're seated. Stack your bones above your pelvis if that's possible for you. Raising the spine, lifting from the crown of your head up. Just finding a very strong and but also comfortable and nourishing seated or standing pose that's active. And then slowly just raise your hands and just bring them right in front of your face. Just hovering above your face, not touching, but you can start to really feel your hands in front of your face. And just inhale and notice the smell of your hands, smell of the room that you're in. Feel your breath against your palms. And just slowly draw your palms away from your face, still inhaling and smelling, noticing the change of quality, the temperature of the air, smell, distance that your hands are growing away from your face. Maybe you can't smell them anymore. And just reach them out in front of you and extend them towards your camera or your screen. Gently open your eyes and look at your hands. Notice what they are as a visual phenomena. Notice them on the screen. Notice them in the room. Have a look at the front and the back. Clench them. Unclench them. Touch them to each other. Notice what they are as a tactile experience. You rub your palms together. Touch the back of your hand with just your fingertips. How gently can you touch your hands? How does that feel? And then once again, bring them back towards your face. Palms all the way back in. Experiencing them again as a smell. Closing your eyes. Experiencing them as an energetic sensation, not a touch, but just hovering in front of your face and how you can sense them there. Take a few big inhales and exhales, focusing on smells in your environment, eyes closed. And as you gently release your hands back towards your lap, slowly move them through the air as if the air is water or gel, sinking down towards your lap. Slowly, slowly. And your hands reach your lap. Settle back into your seated or standing position. Notice your body. And slowly open your eyes.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thank you, Ellen. It's been such a pleasure, as always, to spend time with you both. Thank you to everyone who's been listening in. I hope you do have a little click on the links that we've placed in the chat and follow our work. And we've got a lot more coming up. In particular, do you want to mention the one project you two are collaborating on as we sign off?
Yeah, so ThoughtWorks Art and Counterpulse have teamed up to create a residency called Improvising the Network. So we're building a customized and customizable server at Counterpulse in our facility in San Francisco. And we've recently selected 2 artist teams who will be using that server as a collaborator, as material, to create some interesting projects in collaboration with the Counterpulse community of dancers and movement-based artists. We will actually be having a kickoff panel with those artistic teams on the 15th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. If you all want to join for that, you will drop the registration link and event page into the chat as well. And you can learn about the two groups, which are Hot Club and Dilate Ensemble.
Excellent. Well, with that, the link for that project is in the chat. With that, we will leave you all, and thanks very much for joining.